All right, today is June 12th. This is the regular Finance Committee meeting. I'm calling this meeting to order. Present, I have myself, Councillor Shoup, and our special guest, Councillor Chair Scyther, who is filling in because we don't have current Finance Committee member. That will change probably over the next couple of months once the new councillor gets onboarded. Item number 3 is approval of the May 1st, 2025 minutes. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous. All right, next up, we have a few things on our agenda today. Both are kind of packaged together for the first two. One is to look at establishing a TIF district in the Dunstan area, and the second is to review the CEA request from Marshview. So for both of these, we do not necessarily have to take action on any of these today. Today can be consideration, questions we might need to answer. For the CEA one in particular, there's still financial analysis that needs to be completed. So we'll see that at our next finance meeting. So that one we, by policy, cannot move forward tonight. There's still work to be done. So this is kind of our preliminary review of that one.
Okay.
And there will be homework because one of the things that we're supposed to do as part of our policy is rate the project based on criteria. So I'll be asking you guys to kind of do your self-assessments of it, and we can merge them before the next meeting and try and look at it that way.
Okay.
So just in terms of those topics, by policy, the applicant has come forward requesting a CEA, and we're now at step 7 in our CEA policy, where it's to the Finance Committee to do our review. Because there's a CEA request, there's a requirement by state statute, I think, that there needs to be a TIF formed in order for that CEA to happen. Again, by our policy, they can happen simultaneously. One doesn't have to happen before the other. So that's why we're looking at them both today. The TIF is, while we need the TIF for the CEA, it doesn't mean just because we move a TIF forward potentially as a council that the CEA will automatically be approved. And whatever this body recommends next time we meet, both of these by policy have to go to the full council. So even if we vote it as something we don't support as a committee, it still is obligated to go to the full council for review. So it doesn't stop with this committee. We just have to do our initial assessment and work. So I just wanted to set that stage so that we're all kind of on the same page. And really our role in the CEA review is really to kind of look at the financial elements and then also do the scoring to inform a recommendation that we would give to the full council for consideration. So with that, I think we're going to start with the TIF. So we'll move on to item 4, discussion and consideration on the formation of a TIF district in the Dunstan area. So Tom, do you want to?
Yes, please. I'm pleased to introduce this. Thank you for that introduction. It was certainly spot on. I'm not surprised at that. The staff has long thought about establishing a TIF district in the Dunstan area. In fact, back in 2014, we were able to secure some modest grant funding and did a design charrette that looked at some of the larger undeveloped tracts in the Dunstan area just to get a vision based on current land use at the time, which incidentally hasn't changed, and other factors, including need to solve some traffic problems, just how might this land best be developed. And so we've always had a sense that there is some fairly significant development opportunity in town. And I think we've become accustomed to the benefits of TIFs and kind of getting ahead of that development curve to set the table for that. Though it's certainly true, that conversation is accelerated by the fact that we've got a CEA in front of us, and we're pleased to advance that work. And as you said earlier, I think the TIF discussion can stand on its own and should stand on its own, and it's something we should talk about as a town, regardless of this project and whether you grant a CEA. So what's before you this evening is really the package that is submitted to Department of Economic and Community Development, which is the state agency tasked with review and compliance with the statute governing TIFs. So it's fairly structured. It follows, that process that is laid out and is required. Perhaps to make it a bit easier for you, in my mind, there's really kind of 4 decision points that I would just kind of bring to your attention and look for feedback on. One is what is the actual map boundaries? What are we capturing? And we can spend some time with that. The second is kind of what capture rate do we want to apply for sheltering purposes within the district, and we have a proposal we'd like to review. Similarly, what term would be the TIF? Statute allows up to 30 years. I think even longer for certain types. And then finally, the development program, which really lays out the sorts of things we can use TIF revenues for. And those are the 4 points that I think are worthy of certainly some discussion and ideally direction from you. Great. So with that, I'm pleased to kind of walk you through and point you or speak to each of those if that's helpful.
Yeah, before we do that, does anybody have any specific questions related to the TIF? Okay, yeah, so let's do that. Tom, why don't you go ahead and,
Yeah, so let's go to the map first. Liam, if you could pull up the larger green one. And I appreciate the scale of this, though it does show parcels. I appreciate it's hard to read road names and such. Liam can actually, yeah, zoom in a bit. So the roadway that is kind of running across the paper widthwise is Route 1, where Liam's cursor is, and then Broad Turn Road heading north, plan north. And then if you work further down Route 1, the other way. So that's why On the Vine, and then Marshview Project is right there. So that gives you a sense. From our perspective, there are certainly redevelopment opportunities at the Marshview site. There's another smaller parcel just to the left of that. And then the real opportunity exists really in that pie-shaped area between Broad Turn Road, Payne Road, and Route 1. There's essentially 3 large parcels, all owned by the same owner. And the prominent building, I think it was called the St. Louis Home. It was I'm not sure what it was, a boys home or an orphanage of some sort. Perhaps someone in the audience knows better, but it's now home to maybe 24 different smaller businesses. That kind of sits at the tip of the spear, if you will, and the land expands out to the rear. And we've always viewed that that's about 80 acres in total, and it's really ideally situated and is really poised for development. It also is zoned to support some level of mixed use, at least on the front side. So that's an area that clearly we've always had the attention of. And really the rest of the area picks up parcels that have frontage on Route 1. In large part, these are already developed. There might be a few infill opportunities, but more than likely would be redevelopment opportunities. I honestly don't expect there'll be tremendous activity over the next several decades. It will be here and there, if you will. But we have no limitations from the statute in terms of the size of the district. And at least for discussion purposes, we thought we'd propose this as an entry point. But this is entirely up to us in terms of how we choose to do this.
Going southbound on Route 1, Tom, what is the kind of end intercept there?
That's Stewart Drive, so Dunstan Crossing.
Yep. Okay.
You could carry it all the way to the Saco line, but it's really residential uses from that point forward.
Okay. Thank you.
and all of this is currently in the TVC district for the most part?
TVC, TVC3, sort of a
One of the
mix.
variations.
Yep,
Yeah.
that was one of my questions was, are we overlaying any residential zone right now? Or is that the TVC zone that? Because I specifically remember that resident who had her residential property just down Broad Turn changed, and she has incurred legal fees, expenses to try to change her property because of that change. And so when I look at residential properties, I'd like to understand what happens to residential properties when they switch to a TIF district. Are they going to be facing further barriers as a resident?
No, it does nothing to change underlying land use, so it would have no effect on any of the properties, residential or otherwise, certainly not residential.
Mhm. So just to look at the map, like where this cursor is, these three that I'm hovering
Yes.
over, those are the undeveloped
Correct.
parcels that are 80 acres owned by one owner who, like, this is potential new development, but everything else would be redevelopment for the most part.
Yeah, and we can be more exact about that. I think there are probably a handful of undeveloped parcels, but they're small and they're kind of intermittent, if you will. But that is the real opportunity.
Mhm.
Just for reference, the one little white carve out,
Yeah, the outlier.
that is the CMP substation that was just built, if that helps you.
Where is it? Which
Well, I
one?
think they're talking about the lot with Avesta Housing. Right?
That is more what
Yes.
I was thinking.
Yeah, that's Avesta, because it's already a TIF.
Fair enough, that is Southgate.
Yeah.
And the town owns the land to the rear of those properties along the curve of Payne Road.
Yes, and we did clarify with DECD that properties don't have to be adjacent and we can skip if we want, we can skip a lot if we need to.
Mhm.
That was one of our questions when we first started this.
So in the TIF application, when we were talking about the numbers for development potential,
Mhm.
was that considering just the undeveloped parcels, or is it including potential redevelopment expansion of the existing parcels?
It was considering both redevelopment and new development. And, you know, it's not exactly the same, but it's pretty close. They were looking at about a half mile out from the roadway. And then the expanding in the northwest.
Yeah, the planning and design work we did back in 2014 was quite helpful in this kind of exercise. Without that, we're left to kind of speculate, looking at the zone, what could happen in a magical world. And none of this is for sure or guarantee, but this is a prerequisite and requirement of this to do some speculation. More often than not, we're talking about a TIF with a sizable development that has its own development plan and expectations of growth and so on and so forth. So we're left to our own devices, but frankly comforted somewhat in that the largest undeveloped area, at least we've given some thought to in terms of how it might actually be built out.
Does our comprehensive plan kind of talk to what we would want to do here, what people were envisioning here? Because I know that in 2014, you're saying staff thought this was a good idea, but like our residents, because I mean, I live in that area. I don't really want to see more commercial development. So I'm
Yeah.
curious if that's actually what the comprehensive plan dictates.
Well, there were two things. One, the comprehensive plan does focus on the villages within Scarborough, with Oak Hill and Dunstan being the two major vehicles, the two major villages. And that's why that TVC zoning was done, to really map out what was going to happen, you know, in the two villages. And that really started in 2006. And then in terms of how the planning consultants got to some of this work, they did hold some, they did what was called a charrette and brought people in. And in fact, Mr. Harrisburg was actually part of the, some of the meetings, who owns some of the large vacant parcels. So there was some input from the community about what people wanted. That's where that list of different types of really small scale retail were talked about. So there was some input just in that process itself.
Is this all TVC that we're overlaying right now with the TIF?
It is, there's a couple of parcels that are mixed, like they're both a single parcel that may have TVC3 and the village
Right.
residential zones. So there's some mix there. I don't believe there's any of the more traditional residential zones. I think they're all almost exclusively a mix of TVCs. And we do have a list which we can provide.
And more so than the comprehensive plan, the underlying land use, the zoning is what's going to dictate what
Right.
can happen.
Right. I think that's not to be missed, right? Like, so we're identifying this as a potential TIF area, which allows us to tax shelter and achieve those tax shelter benefits. But we're not dictating what can or can't be built there. This is already zoned
Right.
the way that it's zoned
Correct.
currently. This is more about, is there a benefit to the town to get ahead of any redevelopment or development that may take place out in the Dunstan area?
Well put. It's exactly.
Exactly.
And then my next question is this designated as a high growth area? I know we talked about it as it relates to the school when we were talking about site selection. So
It high growth, it's not the same as, yeah, okay, yeah, it's not the same as the Downs, but it is designated as one of the villages, and the villages are a growth area.
okay, thank
And,
you.
and you might recall, I can show you the comprehensive plan, and these are kind of amoeba. You know,
Exactly.
They're not very exact, so it designated kind of the village in that crossroads area. but without sharp lines and parcel.
Sure.
Right. And if it would be helpful, we did align, when we were putting parcels in, we have the zoning for every parcel. And so we can include a table that shows the zoning for every parcel. And you'll see a number of them that have multiple zoning designations, simply because they're split parcels.
I think that'll be helpful to see. And I think it would be helpful to also see what would be considered redeveloped versus net new developed parcels if we can. Or somehow show.
Well, I think I think the vacant acres, there's about 100 vacant acres.
Yeah.
So I would say those 100 vacant acres are
Yeah.
appropriate, and the balance of the 230 acres, potential redevelopment.
Okay.
And all told, this is representing about 230 acres,
Mhm.
if you add it all up.
And I will say, one of the opportunities for us is to do things that can really reset this village atmosphere here in Dunston. And since I pulled each one of these properties and looked at the uses and all of that, there's such a remarkable amount of structures that are in that were built in, the early 1900s and really have some potential to be really charming. They are charming. There's a chance to make them more charming and more cohesive in the development. And I think that's one of the things that would be great to do as part of this and part of the redevelopment piece.
Mhm. Karen, when we establish a TIF district, to what extent does that accelerate development in that district? Or do these happen is there a correlation where like when you establish a TIF district, you see faster growth in that than you would otherwise?
It really depends. And part of this is many times we're doing a TIF district where there's already this kernel or a project that we're sort of building around. In this case, we're building around some vacant acres that don't have a proposed project on them yet. We've thought about that. We've, made some assumptions. We've, drawn some pictures. And part of the encouragement of development, encouragement of specific development will be in the tools that we choose to use. Like if we use the TIF funds and say, you know what, we really want to enhance the historic atmosphere of some of these homes as they turn commercial. If they do that, then we may have some loan programs that could help accelerate that. But in and of itself, I think just putting the TIF district here, other than it makes us think about our policies and what we do down there differently, and it gives us some potentially funds to invest in the area. I'm not going to say people are going to run out and buy property just because we designated it as a TIF.
John, what I will say about that is TIFs are often used as kind of prospective incentives, if you will.
Yep.
Where that incentive occurs is through a credit enhancement agreement. So that's yet another decision for another time. But it's not uncommon for a town to buy land, create an industrial park, TIF it, and even put out prospectively to folks that there is X CEA on this parcel as a way to kind of spur development. That's not what we're approaching here, though that could be an outcome, and each of those would be reviewed on its own merits. This is really done for our own purposes to shelter value.
Yep.
Right. There's definitely a perception in the community that a TIF district benefits developers. And in this case, unless we're talking specifically about granting CEAs, putting a TIF overlay on this there's no
In and of itself do that.
benefit in and of itself. Yeah.
Right.
Because of other decisions that would have to happen.
Right.
in each-
Right. And obviously, we can talk about CEAs on their own merit, and we have a process for doing that. But I worry that, some of the pushback that we get as counselors is that doing something like this is A, incentivizes growth, and B, somehow is putting money into the pockets of developers. And so I think it's really important to get the communication around what we're doing here spot on.
Yeah.
I would say, with the exception of the downtown TIF, that's not even a good example. more often than not, we're creating TIF districts in response to a CA request that comes
Yes.
first.
Well, and that parcel that is not highlighted is a great
Right,
indicator.
exactly.
Right, like
A single
one
parcel.
single parcel that has,
Um,
yeah.
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 So this is really intended and no doubt it's spurred on and accelerated by this request. But I think this is something we've been talking about. I think we've shown the value of doing this elsewhere in town.
Mhm.
And it just makes financial sense
Yeah.
for us to consider this.
And the financial benefit is that by making it a TIF, any new value that's produced there from the moment this goes into place
Yeah.
gets shielded from state valuation. That allows us to get higher revenue from the state for schools, but also lowers what our taxes would be otherwise from the county. Those are the two.
And increases our revenue sharing.
Yeah.
So that's the benefit. Now, the problem that we potentially create is that the trade-off for that is that we're limiting how those funds can be used. Whereas general taxation, they come in and they are at your discretion, if you will, through your budget process.
That's the capture rate discussion that we'll have after this one, right?
True.
Capture rate and what we put on the application for allowable uses.
Yeah.
And, some might argue that's a good problem to have. We can always dial that back if we
Mhm.
find we're collecting more TIF revenues than we have
Mhm.
use for.
Yep.
And that may be a possibility with the downtown TIF, given how it's performed so far.
Yeah.
Remains to be seen.
So any thoughts on the boundaries?
I think that the decision point for the council, given, and I don't want to talk past anybody. The reason that we're having this discussion is because of the Marshview project and them coming forward with a CEA request and them requiring a TIF in order to make that happen. And so just be direct and put that out there. But then I think then the decision point for the council and for this committee right now is, if we're going to do that, and that is going to be put forward as an option to the council per our policy, do we want to look at, expanding the net? And I don't want to see this rapidly developed, but I am not the owner of those parcels, and that is not under my control. And so for me, there's a fair amount of acreage there that if it is developed, I would think that getting those tax shelter benefits would be smart.
When you create a TIF district, do you tend to see more CEA applications? I mean, I think you were saying, that kind of opens.
Good
the
question.
door,
Yeah.
Yeah,
To people.
That would be
coming in.
logical. We haven't really seen it, but I think you're setting the table for it.
Right, and
Yes.
so I think for me as a counselor, I'm like, is that what do we want to open that door?
good question.
Are we prepared to take more CEA applications in this area, knowing that that's probably, especially with a large developed under area, like, could see that coming.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
that's
I wouldn't
definitely,
think-
sometimes the tail wags the dog on that,
Right,
right?
yeah.
Because then we'll have people say, well, it's already a TIF district, so, the CEA just makes sense, and we want to make sure that we don't slip into
And
that.
so that, in my mind, that's just a whole nother bear that we would
Yeah.
have to deal with if we did that, and could be nothing, or it could be a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. But that is where each of those applications should be looked at in their own merit for what they provide to our community, and ultimately the decision would rest with the council if that's something that they would want to support. So why those would come forward, I would hope that the council would diligently assess those and hopefully get to a conclusion of, is it worth it for the community or not? Even the one that we have to look at
Right.
that's prompting this, like,
Right.
again, just because we're establishing this doesn't mean the council's going to approve the CEA application when it comes forward to the council. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm generally fine with what's drawn here. I think, again, when it goes to full council, having maybe some more in the map that we talked about would be helpful, just for people to really understand what's in there. And again, I see it too, as Councilor Scyther said, where, if there is gonna be any development here, it's good to capture and shield that value to be able to make sure that we have, that benefit that we get, which I think leads us into the next conversation around capture rate and term and development program. So do you guys want to talk a little bit
Sure.
about the recommendation for the capture rate?
Yeah, we are recommending, I'll start with term, 30-year term, and that's certainly something we can talk about. In terms of capture rate, given the fact that we've got the downtown TIF and we've just modified the Higas Parkway TIF, although that is on its kind of way out, that will expire in 2032. 33. So we're suggesting that we start slow here to do 50% during the time the Higas Parkway TIF is still in existence, and then ramp it up to 100% thereafter for the remainder.
Mhm.
But all of those are entirely, the state really has no say over what you choose to do. You can go up to 100% or
Mhm.
down to 1.
So the rationale is trying to like wait for the Higgis Parkway to go
Yeah.
down before we start.
Instead of throttling it up,
Yeah.
let that one expire. And I think based on our experience, we're successful in this budget finding qualified uses for all TIF revenues, and I think we'll be okay over the next couple of cycles, probably within this time frame into the early 2030s.
Mhm.
And for all I know, this development opportunity, nothing could materialize till then, that we could be sitting here, wondering what comes next. Or next week we could be met with a whole new proposal.
That's what makes me wonder, like, is even 50% too much to start? Like, should it be a lower start till we get to the full ramp up, just knowing that, again, there's, other than this project, there's not a lot on, I'm assuming, on the map right now for redevelopment or new development here.
It'll be.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the qualified uses so that I can
Yep.
kind of frame what the 50% would go towards?
Sure. So page 9 in the packet, and I will say that the list here is a near mirror image of the allowed uses we have for the downtown TIF and that we've now expanded for the HP TIF. We're giving ourselves maximum flexibility. And it's easy to get kind of hung up on the cost estimates. We've done our best with what we know in terms of the likely cost of the sort of improvements that we look to cover. DCD really doesn't have any say over that. They just require that we do some estimating in this regard. So there's big buckets. The transportation bucket is certainly the first one, traffic related. There's a whole lot of stuff there. And that is not limited to within district only. For many of the years, or maybe all of it, we could probably spend most, if not all the money on traffic related
Traffic,
improvements,
yeah.
frankly.
Yeah.
But beyond that, there's a whole list of economic development programs. Karen alluded to one of them, for instance, starting a loan program, things that we have not done in the past. Trail construction and improvements, environmental infrastructure, again, big buckets potentially. Public safety facilities and equipment. We do have a major fire station in Dunston.
District, yeah.
Affordable housing. There's a new allowance, administrative offices, construction and renovation. And then childcare costs. So we've tried to be as comprehensive as we could in terms of what the statute allows to give ourselves maximum flexibility, whether we use all of these, a smattering of all of them, or choose to use a lot of, one category. That's entirely our election. And we've done that through the annual budget process in terms of how we're actually putting them to use.
I'm just trying to remember, to Counselor Scyther's point, like some of in the transportation plan, I think if you guys recall, like one of the big locations that needed work was Broad Turn and Route 1, I think.
Mhm.
So my guess is any TIF funds could be allocated to support that
Yeah,
project.
that's right in the heart of the district. There's just absolutely no question that would qualify.
Which probably would be a lot more than just what we would have in the TIF fund.
I would think so. The other things, and one of the reasons we did this design work 10 years ago was there are some real traffic challenges in Dunston, particularly in summer season, and finding kind of workarounds and bypasses and other ways to feed traffic into Route 1 properties and other new developed properties, rather than relying solely on Route 1. And to do that, we want to make sure we've got some initial ideas before a developer plops a plan in front of us. It'd be great to say, well, is there a way you could lay this road out a little differently so we can solve some of our pre-existing problems?
Yeah. Now I changed my mind. I think 25% may be too
Oh,
low.
I was gonna say.
Just because of the project right there.
And let's not forget environmental infrastructure too, because we do have threatened stream down there, and there may be things that we want to do, and TIF
Yeah.
money can be used for that.
So what are your guys' thoughts on the development program and the 50 or 100%? The one thing, I didn't see the loan program in here. That was one of the specific questions.
Yeah, there was my question too, whether or not we can slide that in as part of 2B, costs associated with Setco. If Setco does a loan program for the town, then that could probably be swept under there, but we may want to.
Yeah. I just
make that
remember when we
specific.
updated the Higas one, we did have specific language, but it
Yeah.
might be good to add that specific.
I agree.
One thing I didn't add, when you were talking about the percentages you were considering, there's some benefit to the timing of waiting till the highest one sunsets to ramp up this one to 100%, because communities might say, well, what happens when a TIF ends? Within the next 3 years, you lose your shelter benefits and you start owing more to the county and getting less from the state. But this would kind of supplant that. So it wouldn't occur that way if you had it lower and then made it 100 when Higas went away. There wouldn't be that shock to the system. It would take over where Higas had left off, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a good point. So,
I'm comfortable with the staff recommendation. I 50 is fine, and then to Nick's point, it's strategic to sunset it or to ramp it up rather when Higas Parkway sunsets.
And we'll know more then. I mean, it's an amendment, a fairly simple amendment to
Isn't it in the-
modify that. Some communities throttle this up and down every year, believe it or not.
mhm.
I mean, your explanation makes sense to me. And so I mean, I feel like we could easily use all of those funds
Yeah.
for like traffic alone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's, I just, so, I mean, that makes sense to me and I'm fine with that.
All right, I'm fine with it too. So we'll. All right, the only outstanding item is the term, so the 30-year TIF.
That's what we're proposing. Again, it's up for discussion. It could be anything between 1 and 30.
Nick,
I think you're wise to keep your options open and having it the longest possible. You can always, future council could always change that.
Yeah.
But to have, only make it 10 years and then to have to keep adding years would be more troublesome than at year 15 ending it if you were so inclined, or
Okay.
future councils.
It also gives us the broadest timing for that new development to happen, since we don't know exactly when that's going to happen.
that all makes sense too?
Cool. So it sounds like, at least for those 4 items, boundary, I think it sounds like we agreed, the recommendation, capture weight, we agree, everything we agreed with the recommendation, maybe with some tweaks to the map.
Yep.
And considering adding that
Loan program.
the loan program.
Yep.
My only other comment, and if you guys have other comments on the document, was I felt like the language was really, really strong in terms of implying that we're approving the CEA for the housing project. So I just asked staff maybe to go back through that and make it a little bit more like we are considering that project. Like as I read it, it came across to me like we were approving it in that document. And so I wouldn't want the council to get this, approve the TIF, and then have language that basically makes people feel like we're actually approving the CEA, because that's how I read it. And so I just want to be cautious of how we've kind of framed the CEA project in there.
There were a lot of authors here and some strong editing needs to
Yeah.
be done.
Yeah. That's my only
Yep.
other comment specific to it. So I don't know, Counselor Schubert, Counselor Seither. So again, we could vote to move this forward today unless there's something else you think we need. Again, Tom, can you remind us what the process is? Is this
This 2 readings of council does require a public hearing. It has a bit of a unique statutory requirement for public notice. It's a longer period than our normal public notices, just is immaterial to you. It's just, we need to make sure we follow that law. So no, in the past, I would just say that past councils have typically gone very deliberate and kind of 3 distinct steps. And to the extent that our schedule allows, I would propose we do that. As we get into the CEA discussion, there may be some time sensitivity from their perspective, whether that is of your concern remains to be seen. But I would suggest it's the normal 3-step process: first reading, public hearing, and second reading.
Okay. So I would like to motion then that we move this forward to council for consideration.
Second.
Any discussion? No? All those in favor? Right.
Thank you.
So next up is the Next item on the agenda is item 5, discussion and consideration of the Marshview CEA request. So with that, would we like to invite our guests to come to the table? Because I know they have a short presentation that they'd like to share, and then
Just one final
Yeah.
thing. There were some questions around kind of our reporting on existing TIFs
Mhm.
and credit enhancement agreements in terms of where that information resides.
Mhm.
Do you want to spend any time with that whatsoever? I don't want to.
It could be 30 seconds, noting that it's now in the agenda packet. For those that were wondering,
Yeah.
where do we track these things?
Yeah.
There's now something in the agenda packet, since you asked, to answer those questions, and people will find it.
And I did try and provide that information to the residents in the room who submitted the request, so hopefully, looks like they're busy, but did they get it? And they're, okay.
That information existed. It was just not kind of titled in such a way that would be very obvious in where to
Yeah.
find it. The other thing I'll say is that we've been asked, and we're equally interested in doing some look back on the shelter benefits that we've
Mhm.
accrued to date with other existing TIFs. That is proving to be a bit of a challenging endeavor. In fact, Nick submitted his business to talk to his assessing colleagues, and Karen's done her work. No one is really doing this, and no one is doing it well, is what we're finding.
Yeah.
But we're working on it.
We think we're on the
first. We're
Then
trying,
you
yeah.
can do something new
We
and
think
go,
so.
well, it's
Nick
Nick.
and I are a little obsessive compulsive, like buying some of the stuff
Right.
that's there, including even some of the numbers that were in our proposal. So we have been recreating it from scratch.
Yeah.
But it's something to look forward to. We
Yeah.
do think it's possible, but we're the first to do it right, so we want to make sure it's correct before we publicize.
So is that something we can get on a future?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just to.
Yeah, we just don't.
We want to run it by a bunch of people first.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So this is essentially for us to like have a better sense of what the
Correct.
actual sheltering benefit
Mhm.
is for any of the
Yeah.
TIFs that we do.
Yeah, for folks that have been paying attention through the years, one of our consultants initially, kind of the TIF 101, talked about shelter benefit of 58% or 58 cents on every dollar. That number isn't consistent year over year, and it really is complicated. So what we're trying to do is to analyze every single year, and then provide that level of granular detail, but also some averaging to
Mhm.
talk globally. But certainly any sheltering, even 8% arguably is better than not.
Zero.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great,
Great, thank you.
thank you. All right, so Tom, I don't know if you wanted to set this up and then pass it to others to present, or,
Yeah, I'll set it up by way of process. The Marshview project, the council is aware of that, really vis-a-vis a contract zone request. That has since been pulled, and the project's coming back in a kind of abbreviated format, very specific to a singular building. They were quick in kind of reworking the project such that they were able to get back in front of our Housing Alliance at their next scheduled meeting. So they have spent time a couple weeks ago with Housing Alliance. They're scheduled next week to be heard with the planning board for preliminary site plan review. So they're well on their way. And given the summer schedule and the process that we've imposed upon ourselves, there's a lot of steps and time associated. We wanted to get this in front of Finance Committee because this committee plays a key role per the policy in CEA evaluation and review.
Mhm.
So if we can accomplish by introducing the topic and getting you acquainted tonight, that will allow us to use the next several weeks to do the financial analysis and return to you at your July 10th meeting, and ideally look for you to advance a recommendation.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
So I know there's a short presentation prepared that I think might be very helpful to kind of position this for your consideration.
Yep.
With that,
While we're setting that up, one thing I think that's important to mention to the public, if anybody's watching, and we talked about it at the last council meeting, there really are two parallel paths for this project right now. One is going to the planning board, and because it's all, there's no special.
Right.
Yeah, it's as right, and so any concerns that people may have about traffic, the location, that's all really for the planning board to deliberate. For the council, the only thing we have before us is the CEA and whether we would support a CEA as part of this. So even if the council did not support a CEA, this project could still happen. It might make it more difficult for funding. that could create an issue, but at the same time, that is our decision to make. It's not to judge anything about the traffic or anything like that for this, for the CEA, at least for the finance committee.
Good. And just to clarify, our meeting in July is July 16th.
Well, July 10th for the finance committee.
Finance committee,
Yeah.
it needs to come back to finance committee first.
Yeah, on July 10th.
So a recommendation that comes out of finance committee would be very tight for getting to our July 16th council meeting, just to keep
Yep.
everybody on the calendar.
Yeah.
We
Okay,
appreciate
I'm
that.
clear. Yep, all right.
All right, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
My name is Ben Money. I'm a development officer for South Portland Housing Authority and South Portland Development Corporation. This is a abbreviated presentation since you all are so familiar with the site and our organization. We do own and operate other housing developments in Scarborough already, but it's just a continuation of that, hopefully. We can jump to the next slide. Thank you. So brief overview, the existing site is on US Route 1, existing Marsh Street Restaurant, or formerly Marsh Street Restaurant, and then the flea market. There's a considerable amount of existing paved area that is deteriorating. The building is past its useful life. There is a considerable amount of existing curb cuts along US Route 1, so a lot of uncontrolled driving coming in and out of the site. There also is currently left turns allowed in and out of the site. There's no barriers to that, so lots of curb cuts and lots of ways in and out and erratic driving patterns. Overall, unfortunately, it's been a relatively abandoned site, a bit of a blight on the neighborhood. So that's where we see a potential for improvement. Can jump to the next slide now. So how this project fits into Scarborough. We wanted to touch on this just a little bit on kind of how we got here. So big picture, we looked at some of the recent studies, State of Maine housing production needs study done in 2023. Some numbers pulled from that, Cumberland County in particular. There's some good data points here. Historic underproduction in the county of about 10,000 units. And then using some future statistics on growth in the area, they're predicting that we're going to need another 7,000 to 8,000 units on top of the underproduction that's there. So that's a 17,000 housing unit deficit predicted in the next 5 years for Cumberland County. So bigger picture here as the county. So then we jump into Scarborough, the comprehensive plan. This is a quote pulled straight out of the comprehensive plan that we thought was really important to note. In order to help Scarborough and the Housing Alliance achieve its goals of assuring at least 10% all new housing units are affordable, the town should take or could continue to find opportunities to find an active role in participating and facilitating housing. The active role, I think, is exactly what we're going to talk about now, is that credit enhancement agreement. That's one of the most powerful tools that a council and a city can have and town can have in helping produce housing. So at a more granular level, we've been with the Housing Alliance and they have made the recommendation to fund the grant and the CEA request. And then just another thing to go along with the city's ordinance, this project is going to utilize the current growth permits that this town set up. So trying to use all the mechanisms that the town has in place for strategic growth, the way the town has presented they would like to be grown. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. New for you guys as a council, this is the revised version of the project. We've reduced the project significantly from nearly 100 units to down to 50 units of just 1-bedroom apartments for seniors age 55 and up. Critical piece here is tenants can only be 55 and up, so they'll have no children. So we're talking about no impact on schools. Community room, other features, it's going to be an extremely efficient building. EV on the roof, EV chargers, solar panels on the roof, funded through low-income housing tax credits and some other outside federal funding. We can jump to the next page. So talk a little bit more about the demographics of the residents here. Due to some of the funding sources we've already secured, this is the predicted spread of housing units to income levels. So about 30 units will be making 50% of the area median income or less. Then next to that, you can see if it's a family of one, they're making 44,000 or less, and then that's actually an hourly rate. So you think about the types of jobs that are in Scarborough already that pay in those ranges. Those are the type of tenants that will be living here. Some really cool details that we were able to find recently from the Small Business Bureau was that in AARP was that in the state of Maine, 68% of people between the age of 55 and 65 are still working. So we're talking about a considerable amount of the population in this building, while senior could be supporting local businesses, not just spending at them, but also working for them. A lot of Mainers and people in this demographic are often retired teachers, support staff, nurses, things like that. So they can really help with some of those talents that they already have in the community, sometimes volunteering or other things to help. Also, another benefit of this demographic is usually 80 to 90% of their income is spent locally. That's things like groceries, healthcare, services, supporting transit if they're using those services. So what's great about this demographic is they're really churning the funds that they have in the neighborhood. And one piece that's really important to note is that these are residents that are not encumbered by their housing costs. So every bit of their money gets to go into improving their lives and the ones around them and supporting the businesses. Whereas if you were encumbered by housing costs significantly, a large percentage of your income just goes to your landlord, and that would not be the case here. It can go back into the local businesses.
I'm curious about that comment because I don't find Dunstan like an affordable area. And I think that was a comment that we heard, like, I don't go to On the Vine. That's too expensive for me. So I do have, like, I'm just curious, like, when you're picking locations, are you going, this is an affordable location, on not just a good location, but an affordable location? Because that is one of my concerns is I understand there's a grocery store that's in walking distance, but that's not affordable. And I don't know if that's part of the location process for you, if you're like, this is a good location for walkability, but is it really affordable?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and definitely something that we do look into when we observe certain neighborhoods. We have another building that's near Hannaford. That's a great solution too. I think we have to think of it as it's a blend. They might not be shopping there every day or every week for their bulk of their shopping, but the one-off, I want to just go on a walk and maybe get a bag of chips. They can go there instead of having to go in their car down the road way to Hannaford.
There's also the Walgreens right next to it, so you may not get fresh produce and meat there, but you can get other basic groceries like toilet paper, a bag of chips or other things. That is,
So their pharmacy.
yeah, the
Right.
pharmacy,
So
And
it's,
there's a hardware store.
yeah.
And just the workforce alone, if you look at On the Vine, I think you would say there's a reasonable number of their employees that are 55 plus. So I think that's a really important thing for the local businesses.
yeah, appreciate that addition. So, yeah. So yeah, we can jump to the next page. So this is a little bit deeper dive into some of the funding sources and kind of impacts of this project as it pertains eventually to the CEA request. So one of the biggest things we like to talk about is where the bulk of the funding sources are from for this project. And that's going to be in the form of federal dollars and low-income housing tax credits and those subsidies. And so those dollars are spent plain and simple on the construction of this project. And those are jobs here in Maine, in Scarborough. These projects take several years to build, and those are jobs here in the neighborhood, staff and construction workers that are going to be working and supporting businesses in the neighborhood. And they might actually already live in Scarborough. So that's funds coming to Scarborough, that's investment, that's increased property values and jobs. So then how the CEA is going to play with this project. So every $1,000 that we can reduce our tax liability for the project equals dollars that can be spent on debt. And these buildings do carry a notable amount of debt. And so that comes out to every $1,000 less that we pay in taxes, we can borrow another $14,500. So for this CEA request that we put forward, that's almost $500,000 in more debt the project can take on and pay off over time. So that's the financial benefit to the project. I like to also talk about what are the other things the project is paying for public benefit, because there is an impact. And so the next line item was some of our impact fees that the project would pay, any new development would pay. So the two big ones are traffic and sewer in Scarborough. I didn't have the numbers in when I submitted this, but our traffic is going to be roughly around $30,000. That is actually to pay for the bonds that are already in place for the traffic infrastructure that's already here. So we're going to be paying for things that are already in place, benefiting the public. Sewer impact, that one is actually going to be closer to $170,000. One thing to note is the way that number is calculated is not based on the size of the properties, but it's based off of the number of units. And our units produce about 1/5 of the value that they're being weighted on. So we're actually paying a significant share more than the actual output that this building will be producing. So in a way, it is subsidizing other larger developments, larger single family houses. So then down into the operating day-to-day, if this building gets built, we have an operating expenses of over $250,000. Those will go into property management. Those will go into maintenance. Those go to janitorial jobs, landscaping, plowing. I can tell you that some of our own staff at South Portland Housing Authority live in Scarborough. So it does come back around to the community. We have Scarborough residents on our staff. So those are dollars that can be spent and circulated within Scarborough that otherwise would not be. Then some other things here, the property tax return to the developer is going to be nearly equal to what's being created by this TIF district. You guys are pretty well versed now after reviewing that last application, but I think that I've got Jim here next to me who can speak more to the tax shift if we want to go more into that detail. But I think when you include that shift plus some of the other annual expenses, the sewer impact fees, you're seeing actually a net gain still to the town of Scarborough in just dollars. So then the final piece, not just the financial need for the CEA, is the funding sources for us is through low-income housing tax credits. And in that application process, it's highly competitive. And the TIF request of the amount that we've asked for would give the project 3 points. As a reference of last year, 3 points was what separated 6 different projects in the state of Maine, and only one of those projects was funded. And so these 3 points could separate us from 5 other projects being the one that wins an award and is constructed or not. And so it's the financial and it's the scoring piece. And that scoring exists because it is there to show and represent that towns want these projects and want to play a piece in building that community.
Karen, as you work on the financial analysis, which includes the cost to serve counselor Shoup that you were asking for, how are you factoring in some of these benefits, these financial benefits into that? Are they included in that?
Well, they can be. I think in this, we haven't normally done that. We've been usually just doing a straight cost to serve, but I think it's fair to add in these other types of benefits that we're seeing.
Yeah.
And particularly since they can articulate them,
Yeah.
I think we can add them in.
Yeah, so maybe just the modeling can be like pure, the way.
Exactly.
We can include some other,
Things that offset
Yeah.
that.
Are
Mhm.
you saying that impact fees are a benefit?
I wouldn't say the impact fees are the benefit. I would be interested in the only one that piqued my interest was the sewer one. That sounds like if they are,
Well, and that was my question, because the sanitary district is separate from us. So I guess, I mean, that's not benefiting the town, it benefits the sanitary district and the
Sure.
funds that
Is that-
stay. And so those are the two questions I think I had.
Right.
I
I think we can articulate those and you can take them into consideration. We'll have the baseline fiscal analysis. And I think what I was talking with Jim just beforehand is I'm going to give them the information that how we would derive the number of public safety calls. And that's really for a senior housing project or age restricted housing project. That's probably the the higher of the expenses, since there's no school
Mhm.
impact. And I think what I would do is give them that. And if you think there are reasons to offset that, like we may be overestimating that, that's where we would need, where you can help us out. We'll do this straight. This is our normal analysis. This is our normal generation of the number of calls. And that's how we generate public safety. We look at number of calls
Mhm.
per household.
And we'll be able to supplement that for your information, and the council's information around, some actual experiences in senior housing.
Mhm.
So you can see what the calls per unit are for similar units.
I mean, you guys own Jocelyn Place, right?
So I can actually provide some of these numbers right now, because I was able to get them from the fire department. So Jocelyn Place, also, it's only been around for a year and a half, so. One of the points that the fire chief brought up was, you can give me these numbers now, but they're not a good representation of an average, because at newer buildings, people are still getting familiar with them, so they actually have a higher than average call volume. We're luckily past a full year, so it's starting to average out better, but that number is actually 42 calls for the year
Mhm.
for a 60-unit building. So we're talking about, it's longer than every week. I think it's less than once a week that they're being called. And so if you apply that same ratio to a 50-unit, we're talking about 35 calls a year.
Mhm.
So not a very sizable amount. Yeah.
And is that standard? Is that partially because of the demographic that the calls would be higher, but in a mixed family scenario, would they be lower typically?
I'm not sure. I couldn't speak. I could find out, because we have
Yeah.
other family buildings that I could look at. Jim might
Yeah, and
actually.
I can address that. It's partially, so there's multiple sort of levels to that answer. So realize these are small units too, so there's less people than other units. So you gotta factor in the number of bedrooms and therefore the number of peoples per unit, right? And then that's one factor, and then the newness of the building is another factor. But those things come into consideration. That's why using, like Karen, sorry, Karen.
Angela.
20 years.
I
used to be on Karen's board, and but anyway, I apologize, it's been a long day.
Yeah.
But they use what's known as, and Karen, correct me, but it's an average cost approach, like saying, okay, what's a reasonable average for cost to serve, which is a good way to do it. And then when you look at specific projects, sometimes you want to look at data that says,
Mhm.
what's the refinement based on the actual experience of a project like that, like a comparable?
Hmm.
And you'll have both sets of data.
Right. Our data was derived from our public safety folks, where they actually, this is a few years ago, so it's getting older now, but it does look at type of unit and what that unit generates in actual calls, and then we apply a cost per call.
Mhm.
And
So-
the key is, no, I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say, that's where we can overlap and say, this is what I see from our historic model on the on the number of calls generated per senior home.
Yeah, and then I just want to reiterate too, that a key, because for the public as well, but for you as well, you get it, is there essentially would be no kids. So that's the model, that's the piece of the thing that usually will make a difficult model financially, is if you add kids into the school system, which statewide average $20,000 per kid for operating expenses, so it makes it really difficult, right? But this will not have that impact.
Mhm. Right, sorry, you guys can keep going.
Yeah, so we can jump to the next slide then. I think this is our last one. So this is just an overview of some of the other public benefits, not just the financial piece, but we're bringing 50 units of much needed middle-income housing to the community. All of these funds we consider to be a reinvestment of the US Route 1 corridor. We'd be increasing safety and functionality and improvements along US Route 1. With sidewalks, striping, better pedestrian access. We'll be preserving, in our minds, the marsh. Or our new footprint is actually a reduction in the total disturbed area and impervious area of the site. We're not going to be impacting the wetlands at any point anymore. And no impact on schools. And another interesting fact that we found was that each affordable senior housing unit generates almost 1.25 jobs in the local communities from this report that was done. And just the little icing on the cake is that even after a TIF is applied to this project, if given, the net tax will still go up for the town. So I think the taxable value of the site now is around $10,000 a year. Even after the TIF, it'll be up to 17,000. So it's still a net increase and something that wouldn't happen otherwise.
And if I can just add one final fact too, I really want to stress, when you looked at the slide that showed the percent of AMI, like in terms of the affordability, I just want to make clear for others that are out there as well, like they're looking at 60% of AMI and I think even lower on a few units, correct?
More.
50 and 60, right?
Yeah.
So among the other work that my firm does is we do market studies and feasibility studies for real estate. There is no way to make a project like that financially feasible. It's simply impossible without a TIF. Like there is no, like, so it's not like, oh boy, this is, if you give a CEA, you're like padding their bottom line. There is not a bottom line. They're barely making cash flow and they're barely making like a reasonable return for a nonprofit. So like if you took this to say, well, gee, well, let's just let the market determine it. The market can't even build at 120% of AMI in Scarborough. So if you want affordable housing, there is no other method, period. I'm doing a project elsewhere in Maine right now, and the developer's looking at 120% of AMI for a 75% TIF. And so, and the town is considering it. They haven't done it yet, but that's what it takes to do housing in Maine. And it takes a lot more than that to do it in Scarborough. And 60 to 50% of AMI is unattainable. It's not feasible in the market at all under any model.
You have your bingo card
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah, we do. And I actually know what you guys are saying right now, which is great from our workshop we had.
We just did an affordable
Yeah.
housing.
Oh,
workshop.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, they're looking at the benefits again. I think there were, and this was same for me, it was hard to believe. Can you talk a little bit about how the treatment of stormwater will be better off with this than what exists today? Because there is no stormwater treatment, because that was something that I know a lot of people felt strongly about, the proximity to the marsh and how this could be bad for the marsh or bad for the brook.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so can you just talk a little bit more to that, just to help educate us a little bit more on how?
Yeah, so one of the key features of every version of our project has been the treatment of stormwater. Currently, the site is, I believe, 1.8 acres of impervious area. And so that's paved or very compacted gravel or the building itself. And impervious areas have no opportunity to be filtered. And so they come off of a site very quickly and carrying all of their contaminants. And one of the key features is that all of our stormwater, anything that hits those impervious areas, will be treated before it exits the site. So it'll go through some sort of filtration area, a place to slow it down, also a place for it to cool off. When it comes off of pavement, it's really hot and that can be bad for the environment too. So those are just like a few of the features. It does filter when it slows down too. And so that's the benefit of filtering that stormwater, because it all does end up in the marsh.
Is that something that's required under planning, or are you saying you're going above and beyond stormwater treatment?
So it is required,
Okay.
but there are different levels. You know, you can have more infrastructure than is technically needed, and we do have more than is needed by the ordinance. Yeah.
Great. Are there any other questions for the applicant while we have them up here?
I don't know if that's for you, but I think you had said that the comprehensive plan says that we want 10% of all new housing to be affordable in Scarborough. How are we doing with that?
We're not there. I think from our workshop last week, was it? I think we have 522 designated affordable housing apartments. There may be some more on the edges that are not in apartment buildings, but I think that probably captures most of it. And so with this, that would bump us up to 572.
Out of
Units.
11,000 units,
Correct.
but not quite to 10%.
No.
And then one of the things I was looking at interestingly was since 2019, the number of units that we've approved on average is about 30 affordable additional units per year, which I think the good news is we're at least 10% of our growth permit
Yeah.
going towards affordable, which is really we're required by state law to be doing that as part of our
Mhm.
rate of growth ordinance. So we're at least exceeding, more recently, we've been exceeding 10% per year in
Right.
terms of growth on average. So that's,
That's what my question is this all new housing?
New.
So what you're saying is we are meeting that.
On new housing, just not
Yeah,
as
that's-
a,
'cause
as
the
a
slide
total.
Said new housing is affordable, and so I just want to
Sorry.
clarify that
Mhm.
we are actually currently meeting that goal right now.
yeah.
Okay. And then under proposed housing slide, you just had a bullet that said resident service staff. Are there going to be staff that is like?
Yeah, so we don't have
resident-
staff full-time in the building, but we do have staff that makes regular visits to provide services and information and education and things like that.
Okay.
Also like event coordination. So if there's like, bingo nights or things like that.
Mhm. So do you have any questions, Counselor Seifler?
I do not.
One question I have for you guys is when Jocelyn Place was approved, it was at a 75% rate with over 20 years, which would have been 2 points. And again, that was 6 years ago, I think, at this point when that happened.
Sounds right.
And so how has the market changed where giving you 2 points versus 3 points? Like, I would just like to understand how the housing market has changed since why couldn't 2 points work? And why do you need that extra point?
I'll speak to that. Brooks Moore, Director of Development for the Housing Authority. So back when Jocelyn Place was completed and funded out, we were in COVID, coming out of COVID, there was a lot more money coming out of the federal government for housing. Some more projects were being funded. So the points were still very, very important, but we still got funded with, actually, I'll go back one. We got the 2 points. We did not get funded for the competitive 9% round that happens every September. We barely missed it. We then were able to come back for the 4% round, which they did that following winter.
Mhm.
Fortunately, with that extra money that there was coming in from the feds, and because Maine Housing was generating money from their debt, we were able to get it funded via that vehicle, but we did not get funded from the competitive round. To today, what we're seeing in the last couple of funding rounds is there's less money for affordable housing projects. So there's more competition and there's less money, and the points are now even more valuable.
Mhm.
I think we just had a 4% round. We put an application in for a different project. It did not get funded. It was 11 applications. Typically they fund 6 or 7. They funded 3.
Mhm.
In the last 9% round, there was 20
Think about 20 projects.
projects, 5 get funded. So
Mhm.
it's that level of competition.
So what happens if we give you guys the 3 points and like what would happen if it didn't make the cut? What happens from there?
What happens from there is we would continue to seek other funding sources, home funds, things
Mhm.
like that. We'd try to pull more levers if there was any more to pull.
Mhm.
But it is possible that we get a CA and we can't get it funded.
Yeah.
It is possible. We would keep trying in subsequent rounds,
Mhm.
like we do with all projects.
Okay. I spent some time on the main housing criteria, looking at the point scale. So have you guys already optimized and maximized what you think you can do in terms of points, and there's no room in other areas to potentially get more points?
You need every point.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
need every point. Yeah.
All right. Cool. Any other questions? Is there anything, because again, we're not making any decisions today. I think in terms of the next step is getting financial analysis from,
Can I ask a
Yeah.
clarifying question about that? I do actually have a
Yeah.
question. Just when you're talking about financial analysis, can you elaborate for the public and for me, what you mean by financial analysis? Like, what are we waiting on? What is the expectation? Like, what are the deliverables?
The credit enhancement agreement policy for a housing project, it does say broadly, additional analysis. The main part of that is the fiscal impact analysis. If there's something more that you need, you would have to spell that out. But right now, it's just the fiscal impact.
Yeah, and that was gonna be my question. Is there any other analysis beyond that that we would want to see? Or any scenarios we
Is-
would want Karen to run?
Is fiscal impact analysis a fancy way of saying cost to serve?
Yes,
Yes.
yeah.
The new model, it's the model, if you recall.
And I'm
Yeah.
pretty well versed, but I'm clearly
Yeah.
not 100% fluent.
Yeah.
And so I figure if I'm not sure, there are other people that aren't sure.
This
There you
was-
go.
For Counselor Shoup, this was the model that we looked at, I feel like in 10 meetings with Karen, where she shared with us and we looked through it, so she'll be running this through that. I would be interested to see what the outcome looks like if we did go 75%, but also 50%. Not saying that the council will do that, but I think knowing it, what is the impact if we went a different route? I know that would be different points for these guys if that's where the council wanted to go, but I think from a fiscal perspective, knowing the difference in dollars, just so that we know what that looks like.
I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
And the reason I said 50% is because when I look at the point system, it's 50% is what you need even just to get 1 point.
Absolutely.
And so I think just knowing what that looks like would be helpful.
And I think the one question, we have provided you the analysis in both the flat tax rate as well as our standard 3% tax increase and a revaluation every 5 years with a readjustment of the tax rate down for those 5-year increments.
Yep.
So if that's still good, that's what we've done.
Yep. And just, I wanted to share this because I thought it was interesting based on the stuff Nick provided. So maybe Nick, you can rework some of these numbers and make them more accurate for from what I'm gonna share for our next meeting, just so that we understand the total tax impact of this project as it maybe relates to the mill rate. So I was looking at this year's budget. So we have a $90 million net budget with a mill rate of $11.34. So in this year's budget, we approved 287,000 in projected CEA payments for affordable housing. And so that's 0.32% of our overall budget. That's how much we're paying in terms of affordable housing CEAs. So for the mill rate, that would be 0.036 cents. So that's what we're asking residents today to pay in terms of towards affordable housing. So adding in this project, I know the mill rate's going to be different. I know our taxes are the net budget might be different next year when this comes into effect. But what we're talking about for this project at $50,000 return back would be 0.006 cents of that mill rate. So I think it would be good for us to kind of really understand that too. Like when people talk about how we're subsidizing housing, I think we should be able to be clear and say, yes, it's 0.006 cents on the dollar that we're asking for this project. So I think having stuff like that people can really relate to as we deliberate this, I think would also be helpful to talk in those types of terms.
And just want to point out, according to the CEA, this next round, you'll receive what we're calling the final application. And at this point, the only thing that's outstanding for that is the fiscal analysis. So these guys have provided, unless I come across something I need from you guys in terms of doing the fiscal analysis, I think that would be it. But I'll work with them to make sure that I've got a chance to review that and to put any additional information. But as far as I know, there's no additional requests at this point.
And again, my ask for the counselors as homework, while we still will wait for the fiscal analysis, I think that's just one of the criteria that we can score live once we have it next week. But I would ask you guys to independently look at that criteria, rate it, maybe send it to me and Tom, and we can consolidate it and just kind of see. I mean, some of it's going to be subjective. So I think where we're off in terms of scoring, that's where we can discuss and say, is it really a 1, 2, or 3? And again, this is just part of our process where we have to score it and then make some conclusions from how we score it and go from there.
Would it help if we shared with you the actual matrix to.
We'll
Yeah.
send that out to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, in a Word
was just gonna-
document, so we can edit it, I
I
think
was
would be
just
good.
gonna email John and be
Yeah,
like,
that's what I was gonna do.
send me what you want me to send you back.
Yeah.
We'll send you the forms.
All right, well, thank you guys for coming. We appreciate it.
Yes.
One further thing, we've not gone further, didn't want to get ahead of ourselves in terms of negotiating further terms of the CEA. You know, we've talked about the fundamental financial pieces, but we've obviously had experience in history with this developer in particular. My thought would be to replicate essentially what we did with Jocelyn, at least as a starting point. So if it helps you, I can put together a very simple term sheet that will kind of just spell out the other terms that might be important to you in terms of other requirements.
Yeah, if we can have that for the meeting on the 10th and look at that as well.
Yep.
Right.
That'll be helpful.
And if there's anything else that you guys want, in addition to what was in the Jocelyn contract, let me or Tom
Yep.
know.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
So we'll close out this item, and next item on the agenda is to look at our council goals. And so this is kind of twofold. One is to make sure that we are aligned on the progress that we've made in gearing up for the workshop for the things that the finance committee has been doing. The other one is to make sure, since we only have a few meetings left, if there's something we really want to focus on that may be within our purview. And so can you pull that up, Liam? So everything that is kind of in our purview is highlighted yellow, except for the stormwater management fee, which should be highlighted yellow. And so I just wanted to kind of quickly go through these. So support financial impact analysis of middle school. I don't know if that's something we have to do. I know that the project has been doing a lot of that. Maybe once it's ready before it goes to bond, the committee, if the timing works out, we can review it as a committee and just make sure we're aligned with
Sure.
what that is. So I don't.
Yeah, we've been doing that right along, and we've been asked to do it again for their pivotal vote next week. So we'll be providing that tomorrow morning, actually.
Yep. The next one we haven't touched, and that's a big one. So I don't know if it's realistic at this point that this council or this committee will be able to touch it unless we want to prioritize it. So this is the one that's work with stakeholder groups to develop a comprehensive long-term facilities planning strategy. And so I think this one came about because we were talking about how we have the school, there's a community center, there's library, there's other capital projects. And so how do we collaborate to start to have conversations on this? So how does the committee feel about this? And I don't know, Councilor Scyther, you're not going to be here, so you can offer your thoughts too as council chair in terms of, is this something you think we would handle somewhere else or?
You know, this is one of those that has been around for as long as I've been on the council, and in different iterations of it and different suggestions, different people offering to come to the table together. And we just haven't had that spark that, or that person that can kind of drive this in terms of what this looks like and how best to facilitate that conversation. I'm not sure that finance committee is the right spot for this. I understand obviously when we talk about these big bond items, then it becomes a matter of talking about it in terms of our finances. But I mean, it's a values conversation. It's a priorities conversation. You know, this is a big lift. And I think there's a reason why this big heavy one is sitting here, because it's
One thing you said that just made me think, like, I don't know, Liam, if there's some way to use the survey somehow, like to get data from the community on these projects to inform future work that what we might want to do here, but I don't know if beyond that, I don't know if there's anything else we would do this year realistically.
Yeah, I mean, certainly an opportunity to put it out and get some statistically valid responses back. I will say that I believe in the first iteration of the
I was gonna
survey,
say, I think we
there
did.
there was a question about prioritizing those three major capital investments. And I think that's where the community center actually came across as
Yeah.
being the most prominent. So I would certainly say let's have some discussion about whether there's an opportunity through comms and other vehicles, but it's kind of the devil's, as we know, the devil's in the
Yeah.
details. So with how important these things are, it really oftentimes comes down to money. And so unless you can match those two things, I think it's difficult to get good data.
Yeah,
Well, I feel like this has just been on constant hold because of the school situation.
Right.
So like, it's, how can we, like, and if school doesn't pass in November, it's still the school.
Right. And quite frankly, having a meaningful conversation about long-term facilities planning when the school project planning is as far down the tracks as it is now is
Mhm.
probably, not really a viable option either.
so this is, I think we're all leaning towards, this is a after November item, which again, we can talk about it at the full council workshop as well, but
Yeah.
not, it's, I think we're all agreeing it's not finance. It's bigger than finance.
Yeah, I would just also say that a part of this conversation, as we talk about these kind of three priorities, has been where's the overlap? Is there a way to kind of serve multiple purposes in a singular building?
Yeah.
And that's a piece that keeps coming up and up and up. I think with
Mhm.
school, everyone is kind of laser focused on that being the priority. What we found doing the detailed work is that frankly, we're having trouble providing for the school needs, much
Scope,
less the
scope
thought of
creep is real.
expanding to meet other needs as well. So I think this is gonna have to wait until after that is settled.
Yeah, I know the library is, doing the appropriate work that they need to do to look for temporary solutions to problems that aren't intended to be full-time solutions to the need to actually expand the library. So I think there is work happening there, but I would agree with you, like after November, we can reassess this hopefully and figure out how we want to proceed based on the school results. All right, then,
Just one final challenge. The library group is energized. They're ready to come back to the table when
Yeah.
we'll have them. I do have a concern with the community center group is that is a bit of a faceless group. I mean, we had a group of dedicated folks that pushed hard. They've disbanded. So it's going to take some effort to have a group that constituency kind of
Right.
represent that
That's part of
interest
the
group thing.
challenge.
Yeah. all right, next one is the stormwater one. So that's evaluate the pros and cons of implementing a stormwater management fee. So I mean, I would like this committee to do something related to this year. I don't know if we need to scope it specifically so that we can advance the work or at least start the conversation. So I don't know, Counselor Shoup, if you have thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I went back and watched the budget meeting and I listed off a bunch of stuff to Nick. And I was like, can we find out how many tax exempt properties we have in town? How do we compare to like Portland, who has a stormwater management fee, and how many acreage of those do they do? Our GIS is so advanced that we can look at a tax exempt property right now and look at how much impervious area they are. And could we say maybe apply the stormwater management fee that Portland has, just to have an idea of like how much that fee would generate. Also, because I mean, the whole reasoning behind this is right now the residents are paying the fees for all of these, where in other towns that are expanding, they have come up with a fee, taken out that stormwater management out of your regular taxes and said, we're gonna spread this out. Also, with the vulnerability plan coming up, that's like one of those plans that would support the implementation of a stormwater management fee. Like you can't just create one to create one. You
Yeah.
have to have like a reason to do it. With the vulnerability plan coming out, I think that with the stormwater management fee, that would create more funds to be able to address all the things that are in the vulnerability plan
Yeah.
and things like that. I don't need to go into details. I think between Nick and Angela, they know what you need to do to kind of have a general analysis of like what an impact, like what a stormwater management fee would look like coming into town
Mhm.
and things like that. I mean, I'm happy to do whatever we need to do to try to get something before us. I think that
Mhm.
would be more of like an Angela conversation and
Yeah.
probably a Nick.
Okay, so do you want to maybe take the lead
Yep,
to
absolutely.
maybe have a conversation with them and see when we can get some analysis on
Yep.
the agenda and try and get it before this council or before this committee expires?
Yeah.
I think that would be good.
That's the financial analysis.
I think what I heard was like, come forward with some modeling that shows what the impact would look like financially on the town if we were to do something and maybe scope it in terms of I think the feedback we've heard a lot from some community members is we have a lot of organizations here who don't pay taxes because they're nonprofits, and if there's a fee for stormwater, that might offset some of the burden of those organizations. So I think that's important to understand. I don't know if there's anything else more specifically you would want to get from that analysis.
No, I mean, we could also look at, I mean, again, we can look at towns that are currently doing it, and just kind of see how they manage it and their funds. I mean, when you look at like Bangor, I mean, you can see what it costs to run it, and then you can see how much more substantial money they bring in
Mhm.
with that fee. I think looking at those numbers in the towns that are probably similar in size to us that have them, it would be helpful. And that's the stuff I can work with them on.
Yeah, so maybe you and Tom can align on what the scope of this is and when there's a good time to actually bring something back to this committee to look at. All right. Next is refine the credit enhancement provisions around eligibility and process. So I think this was, is this a complete, because we did it at the beginning of the year?
Yes.
And again, I think as we're, one thing.
That was one of the layups that you put in
Yeah.
for us. It was well in the process.
Yeah. But I would also say as we go through this first round with this CEA, again, if there's things we observe that we want to tweak in the policy, this is a good opportunity to kind of see if there's anything that we need to change.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, we can go to the next one.
Yeah, really nothing for you per se.
Nothing for us there. I know they're very excited to work on this. Once the transportation study is accepted, they really want to get into truly providing a clear roadmap of projects. So I think hopefully this is something the next council will carry forward to have it in our 27 CIP. The grant for Payne Road, again, we pursued it, but because of federal funding, I don't know if there's anything more we can do at this point.
I'm not aware of anything, but the application was filed, the program, I don't know if it was disbanded, but it's certainly on hold. So it's possible that that program gets rebirthed and they pick up where we left off. At any rate, the work is done and we can repackage that very quickly.
Okay. All right, next is fund more sidewalks. We did that. They're done.
Yeah, we did that. Good job.
All right, those are our goals. So now, so it seems like the only thing potentially for us to work on is something related to stormwater. So you'll take the lead on moving that forward. And again, we'll have on the next agenda, the CEA, and that might be enough to cover the rest of the next committee agenda. But if there's other things, Tom, that you think need to go on there, just let me know.
Will do.
Next item is item 5, public comments. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment? Or talk to us afterwards, if you'd like to talk to us afterwards?
How about both?
Or both, yeah.
Richard Hayes, Martin Avenue. Are we on our regular schedule? The light's gonna go off?
If Karen wants to do it, she can do it now.
I'm concerned about the Marshfield project. It is it seems to be going 90 miles an hour. I attended the first planning board meeting and all but one person spoke against the project for various reasons. I attended the council meeting where you voted no to the zoning change. Everyone except one person spoke against the project. Within exaggeration somewhat, within minutes, it's back on the table in a different form. A lot of, they've changed the project. A lot of the issues haven't changed because they can't change them. Route 1, and I know you don't want to hear that part of it. Route 1 traffic is ridiculous. A major thing that concerns me, and I know I addressed this at the council meeting, and I was told afterward that Mr. Hall addressed this after I left the meeting. But it concerns me when there's an announced meeting and the agenda is published with the outcome of that meeting before the meeting. I was at that meeting and the first time I've ever been to an Alliance meeting. And the only reason I went was because I read the agenda and I said, why are they having a meeting when they have published the results they want? Or they publish the results they're going to announce that night. So I went and I sat and I listened to it. And there was a presentation by Southport Housing. The people there listened. There was no objections that were brought up. And it was just after some period of time, rubber stamped. they said, they agreed with the conclusions that were printed before the meeting started. And I asked the gentleman who was apparently the chair, the chair. I used the term theater. I wanted to use a different term, but I was in one of my nicer moments. This doesn't pass the smell test to me. When you have an announced public meeting and you know the results, that's wrong in my mind, and that's not serving the public. I'm against the TIF and CEA. The TIF, well, it may be, I live in Dunston. I assume Martin Avenue is in this proposed TIF district. I don't understand if that has any effect on me. But it really, let's call a spade a spade. The only reason that the TIF district is being talked about now is because you need to consider and support the CEA. If these gentlemen were not here before you with that housing project, I think I'm pretty safe to saying 99.99%, there would be no discussion tonight, or in the near future about a TIF district in Dunston. Mr. Hall may be correct that it's been talked about since 2014. I've never heard any conversation about it. And I truly believe, as I said, I don't believe, let's be totally honest, the only reason you are talking about it now is in consideration of supporting a CEA for the Housing Authority. So I'll end there. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. And I think, Tom, to respond to Tom's comment, or the comment that the town manager made before for you, it is customary for us in each of our agendas, even at the council level, we have the order written out. And in the packet, there is information on ought to pass, things like that. So I think the intent of this group was to put what they were voting on,
The motion language.
what the motion was, so that they could actually vote on it. Doesn't mean that it was going to pass, doesn't mean people were going to vote it unanimously. That happened as a result of the conversation. So that is kind of the way we operate and the way our committees tend to operate when they're voting on things. And then the other piece in terms of TIFs, I will say, I always advocate annually that we work more on TIFs. We had it as one of my 20, probably 30 goals that I brought forward that didn't make the cut. Because again, the TIFs are so important to our community in terms of that tax shelter benefit. And I do think we need to not only expand, but also continuously assess our capture rate to make sure that we're putting the right amount in the TIF fund and the right amount back into the general fund. And I think we're getting to the point with the downs where we really need to kind of reassess and make sure that we want to continue to capture 100%. So it is definitely a conversation that we continuously have. And I'm glad that this did create a catalyst for the TIF, because it's a missed opportunity. That area has been developing, and that sheltered money that we could have saved our community, that we didn't because it took us too long to do what we're doing today. So
Well, could I just respond?
let's talk afterwards. Allison?
Hi, Allison Bristol, Bayview Avenue. I'm also going to pick up on what Richard was saying. I also watched the Housing Alliance meeting where they revisited Marshu Terrace, and Ben from South Portland, who's been very kind to spend time with me on the phone, presented again the new and improved version. And immediately at the end of his presentation, the chair said, well, shall we take a vote? And one person asked a question. One person on the alliance said, well, can I ask a question? And the question was something to the effect that, so the council just voted this down, right? And so is this different? And forgive me for putting it in this term, I can't come up with another word. It was absolute hubris to me to hear South Portland say, well, no, the council voted down the contract zone. And that's true. But every person, every member of the public that was at that council meeting that spoke against this project, not one person said, I object to the contract zone amendment. And so they've come back in a new and improved version. And I also take issue with the fact that the need for a CEA for this project, when to Councilor Shoup's point, we are at 10% with our new construction. We are doing 10%. And I don't have those numbers in front of me right now, but I mentioned, you know, the projects that were involved to get us there. And, you know, so it troubles me that we are, you know, that one project is driving TIF district that we did a charrette for more than 10 years ago. And if you ask the public today, the number one concern is growth. So they might have felt differently about a TIF district in Dunston 10 years ago than they would feel right now. Couple of things, I haven't even begun to crack this. I mean, this is very dense. But a couple of things that popped, well, besides the 2014 charrette, the other thing that popped off the page to me was the language where you talk about the 50% capture and then the 100% capture, that paragraph. It goes on to say the town expects to enter into a credit enhancement agreement with South Portland Housing Development Corp. To provide for a split of TIF revenues on their portion of the district. So what does that mean? I mean, we've talked about a 75% CEA, but what does a split of the TIF revenues on their portion? You know, I think that needs to be clarified. And then the other thing, just in terms of affordable housing in general, I'll, you know, repeat that we can build affordable housing, but it's not necessarily for Scarborough residents, that anybody can move in there. And I'm not against affordable housing. I'm not against general assistance. But if the AMI is 50 or 60%, then correct me if I'm wrong, any person who moves in there, especially if they're not from Scarborough, if they're at that 60% AMI as a rental, will qualify for general assistance. So that becomes another expense to the taxpayers and the seniors in town who are trying to age in place in their own homes. I think I'll leave it at that right now. Although one more thing I'm going to add when we keep talking about the comprehensive plan, I also paid attention to that and spoke up and got involved with that. And I can hear Jay Chase in my ear saying, well, this is the vision. It's not all necessarily going to happen. So every time we say it's consistent with the comprehensive plan, we're making the comprehensive plan the driver. But when the comprehensive plan was being developed, the message was, well, this may all not happen. So it doesn't have to happen just because it's in the comprehensive plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Chairperson Anderson. Marvin Gates, 423 Black Point Road. Very respectfully, I've been to other Finance Committee meetings, and I remember the first one, we were in the Mr. Hall's conference room, and he was sort of like I was a member of the committee. It was so casual in the way you could comment. I would strongly urge you to consider when you have 2 important or 3 important items that maybe we could make comment to the specific item. Most of the people here are pretty well informed. I'm going to make comment about the first 2 items. And first about the first item. The TIF. I'm going to go back and listen to the tape. I might have heard it wrong. We all have our own approaches and angles, and you probably know mine as how I approach this subject. But I thought I heard the discussion between the staff and you as one that included what effect does placing an area under a TIF district, if I have that right, have on the development of it. And I would say the big elephant word in the room is growth, but we'll call it development. And I thought, and I'll check, that I heard, well, directly, we don't know, or otherwise, maybe not so much. It's a matter of conjecture or something like that. I'm trying to be direct. Yet, when it came to finances and it was determined to refer to Exhibit E and to the captured assessed value, I quickly looked while I was sitting here, forgive me for going into the weeds, and the original assessed value of this whole area is $80 million. I think I have that right. And then each year, the projected increased assessed value, year one, it goes up by 7%. I'm going to skip year 5, it's up by 28%. Year 10, it's 79%. I mean, I think I might, fingers crossed, still be alive then. 15, 142, 25, 232, and year 30 to almost 300%. So maybe that would happen anyway, and you're attempting to capture that. So what you're saying, I suppose, is that you anticipate a rate over the next 30 years of 300% growth.
So some of those big spikes are partially due to revaluation years. So it's really the revaluation that's driving those massive spikes.
Well, I agree, but I don't mean to have a conversation with you, the crystal ball and all of that. We certainly are on a rocket ship to increases. I lived long enough to know that's not always the direction. Okay, I'll stop there on that subject. I do have to reemphasize what Ms. Bristol said about the 2014 TIF. I was a property owner here then. I wasn't a resident, but I think the Downs was a game changer. And I would urge you, this is me attempting to be humorous in sort of what I consider a not tragic situation, but something along those lines. The downtown TIF, I was here, and it was communicated, I would say sold very strongly as we're going to create a downtown. I don't know how successful you've been. I think that's a matter of opinion. There's still time. Is this the uptown? I don't know how you're going to communicate this to make it, I'm not giving you a suggestion. I'm attempting a little bit of irony. Okay, finally, the South Portland Housing Development Corporation. It's affordable housing for whom? I benefited from affordable housing, as I've said, from this docket before, or dais before, in New York City. I had to qualify financially. I had quarter market value housing that enabled me to practice my trade as an artist. To qualify, I had to be a resident of New York. Anybody would want it if they can come from anywhere. What's in it for us? Yes, okay, I have one question. 0.006 cents? Or is it $0.006? I'm not sure which figure you were talking about what you're asking out of my pocket. But I want, when something's asked out of my pocket, to get something back. And for me, what it is, I'm just talking for myself. It means Scarborough residents have a shot at benefiting from what I'm paying for. And as I understand it now from these fine gentlemen, that's not the law. So it's a non-starter as far as I'm concerned. Thanks for all the time.
Thank you. All right, welcome, Sue.
Well, thanks. I will try to make this really fast. Some of you may know that I sat at a table on, on Tuesday, the election day. And, we were trying to kind of assess, what kind of interest is there, about, is Scarborough growing too fast? And it was overwhelming. We were just blown away that resident after resident after resident, all ages, and not everyone, but it was very surprising. And as far as today's meeting, I'm just going to say that, you know, if this has long been considered this area for a TIF, 2013, things were very different. The atmosphere and the attitude toward growth in this town has changed dramatically since 2013. And yeah, the benefits of a TIF, we've talked about, we don't have the shelter benefit. We haven't really been able to quantify it recently. And I really question the validity of this because the tax money that we collect in a TIF district must be spent in the TIF district. Must be spent to improve the business climate, you know, the conditions of the area. And what that means is that there's that much less money available to fund our schools and to fund all the other town operations. And so I'd suggest that in addition to doing a calculation on the shelter benefit, that we do a calculation to try to figure out how much extra do the residents have to pay towards schools and other non-TIF related expenses. How much higher is the tax rate? Because all that money that is being spent on things that we might not be spending on in the first place, new light fixtures or whatever, beautify the area. We might not, or, you know, the grass in the medians, flowers in the medians, those kinds of things. We might not be doing that. And that tax money would go toward the schools and toward just all the other operations. So, I mean, I think that is a worthwhile calculation. The CEA that they're asking for, $2.4 million over 30 years. That's, you know, again, that's money that won't go to schools. It won't go to other operations in the town. And Jocelyn Place, we still have not had an answer on how many Scarborough residents moved into Jocelyn Place. And it was a simple request. We don't want names. We just want to know how many Scarborough residents benefited from that. Finally, if looking at the schedule, I know that their application is due at Maine Housing September 18th. When you work your way backwards, we've got the June 18th town council meeting, the July 16th council meeting, the August 20th, and then there's 2 meetings, September 3rd and the 17th. This thing is going to be fast-tracked in order to make their deadline. So we're letting their schedule drive what we're doing. And I think that's, especially since it's summertime. Come on. It's just not fair to the residents. A lot of people are away, or they'll be, you know, they can't pay attention as much as they might like to. And I feel like it's just not right to just let this thing, you know, fast track this right through over the summer. So, thanks.
Thank you. So just for the people who are here tonight, there is a Counselor Corner Live that's scheduled on July 15th, and the topic is housing. So I think spread the word and tell people to come and join us. I think part of our housing goal was to, you know,
Engage
figure
the
out
public.
and where we go from where we are, and figure out, to your point, things have changed. And we need to kind of reassess where we are as a community. Not only has maybe the perception of growth changed, but also our demographics have changed significantly. So we have a lot of new people in town, who have a different perspective as well. And so I think that's where we said, let's start with a Counselor Corner Live and then figure out where we go from there to really engage the public to get more sentiment, including the survey that's going to be coming out this fall as well. So with that, can I get a motion to adjourn? I saw your hand up. We can chat afterwards.
I think question for the Mike quickly. If you can tell us what the format of that council corner Live might be.
So the format is the same format it's been. There's no presentation. It's
It's my show. So if you've been to Counselor Corner Live, I'm going to interrupt you and steal it.
Yeah.
Because if I have to be chair of communications right now,
Okay,
then I
go
get to
ahead.
run
Take
it,
away.
right? If I'm
Take
going to be
away.
there. So Allison, if you've been to one of my Counselor Corner Lives, you know, like I really like to just fly by the seat of our pants here. And so it'll be me and John and Scott. And we're going to have it at Public Safety so that we have room. In-person participation is always my preference, especially when we have that space. And no agenda, and we'll just open it up for discussion, just like that,
So invite your friends, show up and come hang out with us for an hour or two.
too.
Yeah, all right. And Counselor Shoup is certainly invited too to join.
Yes, all
And all
counselors.
counselors should be there.
Yep.
All right, so with that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconds.
All in favor? All right, thank you guys. Thank you.